Welcome to our fourth week of Lenten services. As we start out every week, we remind everyone what we're using for our study guide, and we're using Lent is Not Rocket Science by Nicholas Knisely, a bishop of the Episcopalian Church. And we'll use excerpts from his reading, and I highly recommend, if you want to follow along, get a copy of the book. You'll really enjoy it. Bishop Knisely starts out this week's lesson with the story of a young man on summer vacation and a monk who was sitting overlooking the beach where all the surfers were surfing. And this young man, a surfer, would go out every morning and he would surf, and he would come and see this monk, and he struck up a conversation trying to get the monk to come down and surf, saying, there's only one way you can really experience surfing, and that's by doing it. However, the young monk said, I prefer just to meditate, and I will tell you that at the end of the summer, I'll be able to surf. The moral of the story is, there's nothing you can't achieve if we learn to truly see what is happening before us. And with that, we'll start week 4. Last week, we talked about how to pray by simply sitting still, knowing you're in the presence of God and listening with your whole body to hear what God might be saying. And it's interesting that this form of prayer is not unique to Christianity. In fact, you'll find it in almost all other faiths, all the philosophers, all the spiritual guides that we have to look around and see, they're using the same form of prayer. Maybe there's something to this prayer. Have you ever noticed that if you look at a bright object and you close your eyes, you'll have an image? They call this an after image. I'll take myself out so you can see an example of that. If you would stare at this image for a while, the light is very bright, especially coming through your TV screen, and then you close your eyes, you'll find that you'll have an image. And you may see things in that image inside behind your eyes that you would not normally see if you just looked at this very, very bright image reflecting or being this very, very bright image coming at you off your TV screen, or, for example, a stained glass window if you're looking at it. What we find with these after images is it is being caused because parts of our eye that are used to seeing color are being overwhelmed by the intense light of the sun shining through a stained glass, or in this case, of the intense light behind your TV screen or your computer screen. And they'll continue to send signals to your retina even after you've closed your eyes. You're not going to see in the same great details, but you will see blocks of color that highlight the shape and structure, and you may find things that you miss seeing because of the intensity of the light to start with. And that experience is wrapped up in this after image. Something that was obscured from your regular sight is a good parable on the act of prayer. There are moments in prayer when God's presence is so intense and real that it can overwhelm all of our senses. Those moments are rare, but when they happen, you want to make sure to be as still as possible so you can remain in that place, in the presence of God. And when the moment has passed you, you can reopen your eyes and re-engage with creation. You still see the presence of God, but in a different way, and in a way that helps us to see the world around us differently. We can see God's actions create structures and forms in creation and in our relationships. You can see the colors of God's love in a way that is often missed, especially when you're dazzled by the fleeting sense of God's nearness. So a few questions before we go on. As you pray today, what after images are you seeing? How long did that after image last? And what's God trying to tell you in it? Have you ever seen the inside of a stringed instrument? I have some behind me, so let's take myself out of the picture. And just for a moment, look at these very interesting pictures. You can see the shadows, you can see the grain of the wood. And if I didn't tell you exactly what it was, you might think you were inside a concert hall or some stage and venue. Look at these for a little bit longer. What I find interesting is that within this beauty inside this instrument, there's a huge void at the heart of every one of these instruments. So whether it's the violin, the cello, the guitar, we're seeing a lot of empty space inside that instrument. And it's this void, the lack, the empty space that's inside the core, is the reason the instrument actually works. Without that shape, the small, quiet sounds made by drawing horsehair across gut strings or plucking strings with your fingers wouldn't be amplified, shaped, and colored into a melody that fills the room and our hearts. The empty place is the essence of the instrument, which leads us to a few more questions. What empty place do you have within you? Could God be using those voids in your inner life, the negative spaces of your prayer life, to make music only you barely perceive, but that makes the hearts of other people sing? And we'll move on. Monarch butterflies. They're known for their annual migration across the continent of North America, and in October, they move southward from Canada into central Mexico to survive the colder winter. And in the spring, they return northward to spend the summer in the Canadian climate. One of the marvels of this migration is that the lifespan of the butterfly is so short that a single individual cannot complete the whole journey. There will be 4 successive generations of butterflies between the leaving and the returning, year in and year out. But even more marvelous is that the butterflies travel southward. They fly over Lake Superior before entering the United States. And for no apparent reason, they fly across the lake in one nonstop flight, but not heading north to south, but south to east, and then south again. It's an extraordinarily odd path to choose, especially given their size and the difficulty of that journey. They really don't have to cross the lake at all, but they certainly don't need to take that eastward jog across the open water. The best explanation for their behavior is that's the same mechanism that imprinted the yearly journey path into the instinctive behavior of the generations of monarch butterflies has imprinted the memory that long before the last ice age, there was an enormous mountain looming where Lake Superior is now. The butterflies are wheeling around the base of the mountain that no longer exists. The butterflies are still avoiding a long-gone obstacle because even though they can see it is no longer there, they cannot change their instinctive behavior. The mountain has been gone for a very long time, yet the behavior and the migratory path has not changed. Perhaps the mechanism that imprinted the instinctive path is no longer functional, having served its evolutionary purpose. Perhaps there's some key environmental condition missing that keeps the journey from being reset. But no matter the reason, 2 things stand out for us as we look at this behavior. First, we can see or at least be aware of the mountain's former existence, not by looking at the geological record of watching how life, but by watching how life behaves today. There is an imprint of the mountain in a place where we least expect it to be found. It is only by careful observation, questioning what we can make sense of this otherwise senseless behavior of the butterflies. And the second is that the butterflies are trapped in a behavior that does no good, because they have no way to communicate to successive generations that their map is no longer useful. They learn that what was there is no longer, but have not found a way to share that information, which leads us to some important questions. How many times do we learn something new about what it is to be human? In our moment of history, and either we don't think to or we cannot find a way to share this insight. And what can you do to change this behavior in yourself? As we wrap up this week, how many of you have seen one of these glass bulbs with a small paddle wheel in the middle, and that paddle wheel is usually mounted on a pin, and one side's painted black and one side's painted white, and this wheel, if you stick it in the light, is constantly spinning. Wherever there's light, it's going to be spinning. But when there's the strongest of sunlight at noon, you're really going to see it spin fast. And if you see it at sunset, it's going to slow down, and in the dark, stop spinning altogether. We're often told that the light shining on those blades is what makes the wheel turn, and it certainly seems to be exactly what is happening. But the question comes, how does something with no mass, those photons of light, hitting that paddle wheel, make it turn? This is actually called a Crooks Radiometer, and it was invented by chemist Sir William Crookes in the latter part of the 19th century, as an offshoot of some work he was doing to carefully weigh research samples. You'll find most of the radiometers you might find in a gift shop at a science museum or something like that. It's actually in a rather poor vacuum, but if you make one in a very strong, hard vacuum, you're going to see even more of a show. So the more vacuum is in the bulb, the better it behaves, and the more any kind of light can make it spin around quickly. Some people argue that the blades move because of light pressure, which is a real effect. It's caused by the massless photon striking a surface, giving up their energy in the form of momentum. But this effect, while it is present, is too small to cause what is observed. And it was discovered the blades will turn the other direction if you take them out of the hot sun and place them in the refrigerator, where it's cooling rather than warming. It turns out the spinning is primarily caused by the heating and cooling of the surface of the blades. As they're heated, the blades force the particles away from them, and by Newton's third law, every action has a reaction, and in this case, the blades will start to spin in the other direction. This explanation, and there's a whole lot more to it that I'm not including here, was something that Einstein first proposed. A second effect, called thermal transpiration, also contributes to the motion. What's inspiring is that the radiometer moves simply by being placed into bright light. The motion is more pronounced the stronger the void is around the wheel. So the better the vacuum, the more pronounced you'll see the spinning motion. Kind of makes us think of our own prayer lives. Sometimes when we are motionless or adrift, what we really need to do is find a place filled with light. Just being placed in bright light is often enough to get us to move forward. I'm rather taken that the deeper sense of something lacking, the stronger the effect becomes when the object is placed into the light. So the more you are lacking in things, the more you feel lost, the greater your reaction will be when you are placed into the light. The more we feel the lack of God's presence in our lives, the more the light of God's presence can move us when we come into His presence. Our final questions for this week. Where is the place of God's light in your life right now? And what needs to change so that you can be more fully illuminated? See you next week.